A security accord signed between the Solomon Islands and China back in April is raising fresh alarm over Beijing's growing influence, with Australia claiming the deal has the potential to undermine regional stability. For more on this, I have Adam Hancock live on the line. Adam, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Right, now Australia has been a traditional ally of the Solomon Islands, and it has made no secret about its concerns with regard to the security pact between China and the Pacific Island country. Let's begin with a few words on these concerns, Adam.
Well, I think the main concern for Australia is the possibility that China might build some kind of military base or increase their military presence in the Solomon Islands. Remember, this is a country that's about 1,600 kilometres away from Australia. And given the worsening tensions at the moment between Australia and China, Australia are very concerned about China, being so close with a potential military base. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, he described it as a red line. He said if China were to build a base there, and that gives an indication of the worries and the concerns here. Now, if you take a look at the draft that was leaked of this security pact between the Solomon Islands and China, it shows quite clearly that there's the possibility that China could deploy some kind of naval or strategic units to the Solomon Islands, even armed personnel or police to kind of quash any social unrest in Solomon. So there's definitely reasons for concern. And also, this is the part of the world where Australia has had a very good relationship with the Pacific Island nations for a long time. Things have been fairly settled. Suddenly China is coming in, and that's going to rock the boat a little bit. It's going to disrupt things a little bit, and it's going to increase the risk for not only Australia but also New Zealand as well, and their other allies in the region. So overall, it's a part of the world that Australia feels like they've had some kind of control over almost, and a really strong relationship with, and suddenly China has kind of come out of nowhere, signed this deal, and there's possibility of them increasing their presence in the region.
Right, Adam. Now, like you said, this particular concern is shared by Australia, the US, and of course their allies. The security pact, they believe, may allow China, like you mentioned, a strategic military foothold in the South Pacific. But how are pundits over there in Australia weighing the prospect of this particular scenario?
Well, I think a lot of pundits here see this as a genuine risk. Again, if I refer to that leaked draft document, some of the terms of that, it's very open-ended at the moment. We don't know exactly the terms of this deal, and I think that is what is worrying people, because it's a little bit unknown. There's a lot to be discovered at the moment. People are concerned of what it might entail. On the flip side of the coin, some people are saying we should take it for face value and listen to what the Solomon Islands is telling us. They are saying there's not going to be a base. They're saying this is purely for an internal security arrangement. And there is lots of internal security needed in the Solomon Islands. We've seen a lot of unrest there, some protests, some rioting. It was only back in November when Australia actually sent some personnel over to deal with some recent unrest. And both sides at the moment, China and the Solomon Islands, they've denied that there's anything more to this and that they're trying to build a base or anything. But I think overall, most people do have a lot of concern about it. We know for a while now China has been signing some economic deals with Pacific Island nations, and they've certainly been eyeing up that part of the world. And I think people are looking upon this a little bit wary at the moment.
Right. Adam, Prime Minister Manasseh Segavare of the Solomon Islands has taken issue with the word backyard used by Australian Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews in referring to the islands. Now, speaking within your capacity as a journalist, do you see this particular word as a harmless metaphor, something more?
I would probably look at it more towards being a bit of a harmless metaphor. It's probably a little bit of a throwaway comment. Language in Australia can from time to time be quite casual, even within Australian politics, and effectively referring to something as being in your backyard is basically just referring it to something being quite close by. I don't think it's meant in too much of a derogatory manner, although clearly it has caused a lot of upset in the Solomon Islands. The Prime Minister, as you mentioned, he went on a bit of a tirade about it in Parliament the other day, saying a backyard is somewhere where you put your rubbish. We should be treated with more respect. We're an independent nation. We have a vote at the United Nations. We should be treated equally. And also, it's all part of a wider kind of feel that Australia has started to take their eye off the ball a bit when it comes to Solomon and the other Pacific nations. They reduced some federal aid. There was a lot of upset that Australia didn't send more senior ministers to the Solomon Islands when word of this security pact with China first came about. There's been a lot of criticism from the opposition Labour Party here about the way the government has handled this. So using terms like backyard, it probably does look a bit unprofessional, certainly a little bit disrespectful. But from a personal opinion, I would say, knowing Australian culture and the Australian use of language, it's probably a little bit more harmless, but maybe lost in translation slightly.
Right, and staying with language, Adam, this is an impromptu question, but there's also been talk about how the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands spoke about that, of a potential invasion of the country. How are authorities over there in Australia responding to this?
Yes, that came out the other day, and Scott Morrison actually released a statement or gave a press conference off the back of that. And I think he was trying to just slightly calm things down. I mean, it was Scott Morrison, after all, who first of all came out with this comment of a Chinese base in Solomon would be crossing a red line. He was then asked by a journalist what exactly would happen if China was to cross a red line, and he didn't really have an answer. But it was sort of giving the indication that there could be some kind of, military force sent over. No suggestion at all that that's going to happen. But I think, given the anger from the Solomon Prime Minister the other day, Scott Morrison has come out and he's tried to improve relations. He sort of said how they'll deal with this issue diplomatically. They'll continue to have good conversations. He's referred to a lot of previous, good moments between the two countries, including the aid that Australia has provided to the Solomon Islands, support with COVID-19 vaccinations, and he's tried to go back on that a bit and just simmer things down a bit, because it really did have the prospect of boiling over. And remember, we are in the middle of a general election campaign here. The last thing that Prime Minister Scott Morrison wants to do is to be dragged into a row over the Solomon Islands.
Right, and I will get into that in a bit. But first, Adam, some observers believe that this security arrangement may have far-reaching global repercussions as the region hosts important shipping lanes. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure, yes. Well, Solomon Islands are based in the middle of a very strategically important area of the world. It's shipping lanes that connect the USA and their allies in Asia, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And China knows full well that if they were to get some kind of stronghold in the Solomon Islands, they could possibly, block or disrupt those shipping lanes, which are very sought after and a very important way for Australia to communicate with the Pacific, and also for trade and shipping to come between the US and Asia. So it's a key part of the world, and there's a much wider global context. This isn't just about the Solomon Islands. It's about China's possibility of taking more control in this part of the world, and yet again, in another part of the world, gaining more of a firmer grip and a firmer base. And that is something that's causing a lot of concern. It could also cause isolation for Australia as well. If China is to gain some control over these waters, then again, it kind of isolates Australia a little bit further and causes a bit more angst. I mean, these shipping routes, they've long been sought after. You go back as far as World War II, when Japan were trying to get control of the Solomon Islands, so they could get control of these shipping lanes. So this is nothing new. This part of the world has seen a lot of things like this in the past. But it's very, very important at the moment what's happening in a wider global context.
Right. And now, Adam, going back to the domestic front over there in Australia, like you mentioned, this latest regional diplomatic development is becoming an issue ahead of the country's May 21st national elections. Having said that, what has been the general public response?
Well, I think it has actually been a little bit of concern about this. People are well aware of this story. It's led the news here for a couple of weeks now. Everybody is aware of the ongoing sort of dispute between China and Australia. Scott Morrison has obviously been very vocal about China, so people know about it. The Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, they actually ran a poll where 72% of the people polled said that they were concerned about this news of this security pact. So it's something that's cutting through. It's making noise. Whether or not it's going to influence the election, that remains hard to call at the moment, really. I mean, obviously, the opposition Labour Party, they're trying to make a big deal out of this. They're trying to use it as a stick to beat the government with. They said they've dropped the ball. They've made a huge political blunder in allowing this deal to go ahead. But whether it's going to actually cut through with voters, it's hard to call. There's plenty of other things at the moment in focus here. Obviously, the economy, we saw interest rates being raised this week here. We're coming out of the back of a pandemic. There's lots of discussion how that has been handled. Day to day, the cost of living crisis as well. So, as always in Australian elections, the focus is mainly on domestic issues. But for the first time in a long while in an election campaign, a foreign affairs issue has become a lot bigger. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is of course bigger than just the Solomon Islands. This is about China and China's grip on this part of the world. And that's something that does concern Australians.
Right. All right, Adam, thank you very much for making the time to join us live with your thoughts.
Thank you very much.